cape.
Welcome Wargamers to 2+ Stuff and also to Idoneth Deepkin Week. In the next week to 2 weeks, we'll be diving into the extensive and incredible lore that this new faction has for Age of Sigmar. Starting off with this video, which is really intended to be sort of a bird's eye view. If you have any kind of passing interest in the army, this will get you a grand sense of what it's like before we dive into the minutiae later on. And their story is a fascinating one. It actually picks up at the end times, right before the world that was blew up. If you're curious about the end times, go see my end times video. Skip to the section that has to do with End Times Cain, that book, and you'll get a sense of what's going on. Basically, there was a massive battle between High Elves and Dark Elves, and during that battle, Morathi actually opened a rift that let Slaanesh in, and he just devoured all the elven souls. I'm greatly paraphrasing here, but that's generally speaking what happened. And for the longest time since AOS has started, we've just been told, well, where are all the elves? Well, they're inside Slaanesh. Well, they're inside Slaanesh. But there's a bit more to that story, and that's where these guys pick up. Yes, Slaanesh ate tons and tons of, I would say, the vast overwhelming majority of elven souls at that moment. However, not all of them were present at that battle. This makes sense. There are some elves who were devout to a god of their pantheon in the old world called MacLeod. MacLeod was basically their version of Poseidon, the god of the sea. And when the world that was finally imploded and destroyed itself, the souls of the devout to MacLeod were taken by him. And of course his theme is sort of the murky depths, right? The deepest parts of the ocean. And so they were kept very well hidden. And Slaanesh, after he was getting kind of full from eating the elven souls at that big battle in End Times Cain, he started searching for more elven souls, and he kind of found these little pockets, people whose gods had taken them away, like the various minor pantheon of elven gods in the old world. They've all tried to regain power by taking these souls, so he went one by one, found the old world gods, destroyed them, and ate the souls that they're keeping safe. The very last elven god from the old world that he was able to find was MacLeod, well hidden in the murky depths of the void, basically. So MacLeod was struck down, and those souls were eaten absolutely last. Again, these are the most devout followers of that particular god. So now we fast forward to the Age of Myth. Elven gods are now conscious again, they're searching around for other elves. They find Morathi, Teclis, Tyrion, Malarian, all these guys. That's pretty much all there is. There's a few scant remnants that were hidden away in Azir, but certainly nothing to constitute an entire population. As we covered in Daughters of Cain, whether it's by trickery of Tzeentch or not, Teclis actually discovers where Slaanesh is being held, sort of a midway point between the realm of shadow and light. Those three elven gods plus Morathi kind of bond together and they make a deal. They say, okay, we're going to find a way to get Slaanesh to basically regurgitate all these souls. Morathi knows how to do that. Cool, that's her part in this. And for each one that comes out, we're all going to be given kind of a stipend. Everyone's going to get some souls. You can craft them in your image and make a people unto yourself. And we're going to rebuild our race in that way. This seems like a very fair deal. Now, the first souls that came out of Slaanesh were the last ones that he ate, right? Top of his gut. And those were the people who were dedicated to MacLeod, god of the sea. And for his efforts in coordinating all this, Teclis was given the honor of the first batch of souls. So that's how we wind up with these Deepkin. The Deepkin are that first batch of souls that were taken out of Slaanesh. Again, they're kind of a prototype, very highly experimented on because they didn't know how much corruption went down, nothing like that. But they are Teclis' own and his to shape in whatever image he sees fit. Now, if you're not familiar with Teclis, he was, I should say, in the old world, a high elf, so a good guy elf, who was all about magic. He was also an incredibly shrewd person. He would make terrible, terrible choices because he kind of saw the bigger picture. In End Times, he was kind of reviled by many people because he saw it was coming. He would damn entire races just to try and save the planet, basically. So he's very intelligent, very powerful in magic, but he also thinks on another level that people don't always get behind. And when he took these souls, he wanted to kind of recreate his old society of high elves, right? Really focusing on nobility and artistry and all these great kind of high-end, lofty ideas. Now, their first concern above anything was corruption. You're pulling these things out of the belly of a demon. What happened to those souls? We have no idea. Got to be very, very careful. And unlike the Stormcast Eternals, who have the Anvil Apotheosis, where they basically just break you apart and reforge you and break you apart, they do that a bunch of times to get you, completely pure. These souls don't really have anything quite like that. Instead, Teclis weaves some purity magics and tries to basically purify them as best he possibly can. But it became very evident early on that something wasn't quite right. The souls that came out were very withdrawn and almost became resentful of Teclis' teaching. Now, as many wizards do, Teclis has something like a mage sight. Basically, he can look at you and like kind of see your soul, basically. And he's looking at his new race that he's just created, and he's seeing that there's some darkness in them that he can't understand. He can't penetrate it with like his kind of like, they call it a light of reason. They can't quite grasp what's wrong with these guys. So now you have this small race of people who were created. There's something wrong with them, but we're not sure what. And they know, the Idoneth know, that they are under high scrutiny. If things go wrong, they're dead. There's no question about that. They understand the cost of corruption. So rather than waiting for Teclis to basically lose patience and kill them, they ran away. And Teclis, seeing his creations kind of like scurry around, is like, oh no, we gotta do something. And so he goes to kill them. And actually Tyrion, his brother, who is the god of light as far as we know, steps in and says, no, just let him go. I'm not going to hurt anyone, but it doesn't make any sense to go and kill the souls that we spent all this time trying to reclaim. And that, in a nutshell, is kind of the origin story for this entire race. They are elves that were pulled out of Slaanesh. There's something tainted and wrong about them, but in addition to that kind of corruption, there's also this kind of nobility about them, because Teclis did in fact imprint them. He formed them in an image. So that's where we kind of mix these kind of ideas of, they have the instincts and worship of MacLeod, their water god that saved them initially. You have the corruption of Slaanesh, but then you also have the fact that they were molded in a very specific image by Teclis. So there's like 3 different mindsets converging to create this race. It's also important to note here that Teclis did teach them how to use magics. Magic was a big deal for High Elves, and so he tried to impart that on his race that he created. And with that magic, they were able to go undersea. We're going to talk about the Ether Sea here in a little bit, but imagine this, basically. If you had a way to make water breathable as if it were air, and then make air breathable as if it were water. That kind of middle ground where fish can exist above water level, and then mankind can go below the depths and still breathe. That's one of the magics they were taught. However, it's very clearly noted in the battletome that they were not taught everything they needed to survive. So they went down there and they could breathe and function, but how to live, not so much. They had to actually develop new types of magic. This is actually one of the few races that develops new magics in this universe. To name a few, there are coral crafters. I'm just making these names up to kind of give you an idea. People who can like manipulate literal coral to form structures and buildings and things like that. They can project breathable air, they create defenses, they can do secrecy shrouds, they can break the minds of wild beasts to tame them and use them as mounts. And with those magics kind of coming together, they began living on their own. Now, it was noted by Teclis when he was creating them that there was a lot of infighting between these guys. They didn't all get along. They kind of fractured very early on. Well, when they went down below the water, in the realm of light, they noticed something very cool, which is called the Whirlway. If you can imagine this, it's a system of realm gates that are just below water. That's really what it is. I'll likely have a video about that later on, but really, that's what it really is. It's just realm gates that take you to different realms and allow you to cross into the oceans of other realms. So, as the Idoneth Deepkin now, as a lone group of survivors, started to kind of fracture again. Some of them went off to various realms and started new enclaves. So the race is kind of budding, it's growing, they're kind of getting their feet on the ground, so to speak, in terms of how to build a society, what we should look like. And then they all, across all the realms, all notice the same problem kicking in at the same time, and that is the flaw. Only 1 out of 100 of their children would survive past infancy. It didn't seem to matter who the parents were. Nothing seemed genetically relevant in terms of there was no dad who produced, that 1 out of 100 kids. Nothing like that. It's just very random. And their spirit seers, kind of their mystics and mages, would look at the children who were born and see, kind of peer into their souls and see that the 99 out of 100 who were dying had a weak and kind of withering soul. It would just kind of dissipate. Now, this is a race of people at this point who have developed new magics to survive, and so this was just an effort where all of the enclaves said, okay, here's the deal, we gotta work together, put your best minds to it. Why is this happening? Let's get this fixed. And after years of study, they realized they can't actually fix the flaw. There's something beyond their scope that's going on here, but they did find a few ways to kind of mitigate it. And there were 2 different schools of magic that came up with solutions that actually kind of work in tandem. One of them was how to sever a soul from its body. My understanding is that they were probably doing tests on the newborn infants to sever their soul, see if they can heal it outside the body, then put it back in. And of course, the other one was how to infuse a soul in a way that lasts. So these 2 streams of research and thought came together. Now, they tested it initially on beasts, trying to take the souls of monsters and creatures, but it didn't really seem to hold or take. It would maybe add minutes to their life, whereas if they took the soul of a mortal, well, that would add quite a bit of time. Keep in mind they have a much broader sense of the word mortal than we typically would when we're looking at, say, a war scroll that has the word mortal or something written on it. These can be humans, orcs, Duardin, Skaven, Sylvaneth, anything like that with living essence, sentience if you will. And with that, the first sort of raids, which we're going to have to come back to quite a bit here, were developed, where they started going out, capturing as many souls as they possibly could, bring them back, and then implant them into these new infants that were born to give them a chance to survive. These things combine to make a faction that relies heavily on secrecy, meaning if they're going to keep taking souls to their experimentation or just to propagate their race, they can't have people knocking on their door. So they develop magics about wiping people's minds and memories and things like that. Again, they go out, they raid, they get souls, they infuse it into their children, the race grows, and then it requires bigger raids and bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's really why this faction has come to this point of the storyline in AOS. They're beginning to come under assault from Nagash, who sees them as soul thieves, which of course they perfectly are. And the forces of chaos are now being alerted. Now that the raids are getting bigger and bigger, they're drawing attention to themselves in ways they never wanted to. So they reach that point of critical mass where they have to step into the world again and fight. And so that is realistically all there is from a kind of bird's eye view lore perspective about where these guys come from, why they're here now. But what I want to talk about now is why they are fascinating, and I hope that you stick with me through this because this is going to be a theme that you see through the entire week, is why are these guys so incredibly cool? I said this the same thing with Kharadron Overlords, where you have this narrative that is about a group of gods, a pantheon, and all these gods make their own civilizations and they kind of morph society and existence to their whim. But what does it look like when a faction rejects their god and their god rejects them? We don't have anything quite like that. The KO rejects deities, sure, because they kind of got through this on their own with science and technology, but the KO weren't actually formed in the image of somebody, right? They survived, and so they just kind of propagated their race that way, but this is different. These were created purposefully with design, and then their god Teclis rejected them, saw them as corruption that needed to be wiped out, and they had to run from him and want nothing to do with him. Some strong elements that I see in this are sort of the Frankenstein story, not the movies, but like the actual Mary Shelley book, where Frankenstein can talk in that one if you're not familiar, and he actually asks incredibly powerful questions about the nature of being created to be rejected by your creator. What part of responsibility does Teclis have for creating a monster that goes around and steals souls? Also, they are an order army. Again, they are against chaos, and that is the primary qualification for being an order army. You don't have to be a good, quote unquote, just you have to hate chaos more than you hate your fellow order guys. But here's the thing, they stand with Sylvaneth and Stormcast Eternals, factions who are not just created in the image of their deities, but like sold out, right? Just mindlessly devoted to them. Some of them are fanatical, some are a little more even keel, but all of them have a kind of very heavy religious tone to their worship. What does that look like to a faction who has been so kind of burned by their deity? I think it would hurt. I think it'd be very hard to work with somebody else like that, because you're coming from two completely different perspectives when you talk about the deities. And these guys are also incredible because they struggle with a duality. They were made to be noble warriors and people who hate chaos. But what they have had to become in order to survive is soul thieves and prey upon unsuspecting innocent people. And as you're talking about working with other factions, what does trust look like when you know that you could be for dinner? Meaning, what is a free people's, archer trying to stand next to in line at a battle next to a Deepkin guy? Like, do you feel comfortable? No, I bet you would not feel comfortable at all. You would not like that position whatsoever. And it raises a few other questions. Can they capture Stormcast Eternal Souls? My gut is no, but I have no reason to say that. And what you start to see is that idea of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, which makes sense, right? As long as they're opposed to chaos and opposed to Nagash, then they're gonna be on Order's side. It makes perfect sense. But the question is, how far can you ride that? Right? At what point do you just become another enemy? And I think the Idoneth Deepkin really ride that line, where I do think that sometimes they are the enemy. And furthermore, what does it look like when they win? But I mean, let's say everything goes according to plan, right? Let's say chaos is pushed off the map, destruction is kind of knocked down a peg, and it's really just order. Okay, order, maybe death, kind of do that kind of stuff. But what happens to these guys? Do you still want these guys on your team when things are kind of under control? Absolutely not. I think the end game would likely be, we'll use the Deepkin's help for now, and then when things settle down, we'll crush them. Again, going back to that trust and mistrust. I think in the old world, we were told that the elven races, high or wood elf or dark elf, didn't really get along. There's a lot of air of superiority to other races. They didn't get along, didn't work well with them. But this gives us a much more tangible reason. There are vast theological differences to why these factions would never work together. But they have a common enemy, so what happens when that common enemy goes away? And wrapping up here, I love these guys for the same reason that I said I love KO, or Keratin Overlords. In a world of gods, they had to forge their own destiny, right? They were the ones who learned about the flaw. They sought the cure. From scratch, they built empires and governments. They were rejected by one god, meaning Teclis, and then spit in the face of another one, Nagash, because they steal his souls. And they are godless in a narrative full of gods and worship. Which is interesting because this makes survival more important than any deity. Where Stormcast Eternal will die if Sigmar asks him to defend this place until your last breath. They'll do it. But for these guys, survival means everything. And when survival means everything, you can be brought to some very dark places, which makes them an equal part villain and hero. So friends, those are my thoughts on kind of the bird's eye view of the Idoneth Deepkin. I am having so much fun with this book. I got it on Saturday, sat down and cranked out, I think, notes for 6 videos right away. It's just going to be a great ride. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you'd like to stake along with the ride with us as we go through the Deepkin book, go ahead, click subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want to introduce you to some awesome folks. These are my patrons over on Patreon, and they make this show possible by their direct support of me to buy battletomes and Black Library books and all the material I need and the hardware support that I need to make this stuff possible. And if you'd like to join them, go ahead and click over to the Patreon page, to the link in the description down below, and you'll be introduced to a really awesome community of people talking about the hobby, sharing what they're painting. I invite them to be a part of polls to decide what content comes next. I raffle off every battletome that I review, and we're having some great fun and discussions over there. So go ahead and check it out. Now, if you can't support in that way, that's completely fine. I'm just so glad that you watched this video here today. And if you have an Age of Sigmar lore question, go ahead and click subscribe and leave it in the comments down below. I read every single question and comment. I respond to as many as I possibly can, but I use them all as inspiration for future videos. So go ahead and do that now. And I look forward to seeing you guys on my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.